Bastion getting a big buff recently. He's been creeping up in ranked matchmaking quite a bit, so we wanted to make a new video covering the most important tips on how to counter him. First thing everyone should know is that Bastion is weak to mobility. I say mobility and not dive because I think far too many people get confused in thinking that the goal is to dive the Bastion. Although we'll show you how to do that too, it's more accurate to say that you use mobility to avoid the Bastion. And the best way to do that differs from map to map and depending on where it's set up, but on this first clip on Numbani, see a picture-perfect example on how to dismantle a Bastion high ground hold. I'm failing wall climbing here, scaling on the right side, but this position directly under the high ground where my Winston drops to is one of the best spots in Numbani to get to because it's out of the main lines of sight of all the power positions that the enemy can take, lets us pressure the point, and forces the enemy to come down. My tanks do a reasonably good job avoiding damage, and that's what you want. We want to invade this space, but not commit, because the Bastion is way too durable. It's not until I'm able to do my Reddit Lucio shenanigans to knock the main tank off to displace the setup do we then start to easily take the point. This works for a combination of reasons. We're pressuring the objective in a spot that the enemy can't see, staying out of the line of sight of the Bastion, and then we're harassing and surrounding it, but not overcommitting. Our D.Va does kind of. I think the Hulk catches her out, but I get a big amp on my Winston to get him back up to full, do a lot of damage myself, and displace the setup. That's what you want to look to do. The way to enable this is to really concentrate on honing your pathing, which is to say your movement to avoid the Bastion's line of sight. Here we see that the bunker set up in the top center, so with some jumps, a well-timed speed amp, bouncing off the walls, we very quickly get out of the line of sight. This shouldn't work, frankly. We should need a D.Va to pull this off, but our pathing is good. Then we see we force the Bastion onto point, which I think is a common place that especially at low ranks, players see him set up. And I'm left with a decision to make. Do I commit onto point with my tanks, or do we secure the perimeter? Your ability to answer this question quickly in the heat of battle is the difference between losing to the Bastion and winning. We can never commit to the fight on the Bastion almost ever. It's really hard to do, and you need D.Va to do it anyway. So instead, I peel back to make sure we secure our DPS staying alive outside of the point, because as long as we survive long enough, we have a massive ranged advantage with the Hanzo and Widowmaker cross-firing from outside of the point, because remember, the Bastion's just going to stay here. So as long as we're patient enough to just keep spinning around in circles surrounding the point, our damage will eventually find its mark, or we'll get a Dragon Strike, which is one of the typical win conditions to just displace a big bunker like this. So depending on what role you're playing in the team comp, you want to remember what your goal is. Our tanks really should not have committed to point here. Getting our DPS surrounding the Bastion was the win. Then we just wait as we surround them and poke and prod and exploit the fact that Bastion's immobile. Luckily though, we do end up clutching it out, but it would have been even easier if our tanks didn't overcommit onto the comp. For further examples of this, we see a picture-perfect example from Fusion University against ATL Academy. This was from the NA Contenders Grand Final. They scurry the little Hammond off to point. His job is to pressure the objective outside of the control of the Bastion. If the Bastion was on point here, he wouldn't be anywhere near it, but we can really see a nice, clear perspective from the bird's eye view, the crossfire they're attempting to set up. Hammond is using cover behind the bell to poke from the backside, and from their position of safety, they're taking what the defense gives them. Oh, you want to come contest with your D.Va and Brigitte? Well, we have a crossfire set up. Elk, the Ana player, is actually way back at the choke, which you would think is leaving her vulnerable, but the Bastion comp really doesn't have the resources to just go dive into the choke like that. They're set up committed into their bunker. And then eventually, with all that poking and prodding, you will either find pickoffs that gives you a big advantage, or you'll get your ultimates. And your ults, playing the mobility comp, is usually always better than the bunker comp's ults, just by the nature of how most ults work better on the offense, attacking into a position. Now, that's the ideal way to do it, I think, but it is possible to dive engage onto the Bastion if you do a few different things correctly. This is just usually a bit more risky. You see here, Mayhem Academy is setting up to sneak their way into dive positions, then the Winston launches, but this only works with the defense matrix pocket to keep him alive. Then the bubble drops down, blocking a lot of the abilities of the rest of the Bastion's teammates. Then before you know it, everything's closed in surrounding the Bastion. D.Va does a ton of damage to it close up, up, the Genji can use the space the tanks created, and that's all she wrote. If you can get your dive to be perfect, you can dive engage onto the Bastion. It's just that the supporting cast, typically, I think, is going to be able to find a lot of value baiting the Bastion. Not to mention, getting the defense matrix perfectly positioned to block most of the damage can be quite difficult to do. But here we see the enemy team commit all their resources to killing our Bastion, but it falls them victim to my Diva Bomb and then our other damage sources from the other directions. The problem with diving like this is that you very easily can overcommit too many cooldowns to getting the Bastion dead quickly and losing too many members to do so, leaving the defending team, yeah, maybe without a Bastion, but with a lot of their supporting cast still alive and a man advantage, still looking pretty strong. And it's that playstyle that I really exploit up against this enemy team, who's trying their best to set up a really coordinated attack onto my Bastion, but that allows me to kind of freely harass them over and over again because they're playing too slow. They're not really getting into positions of advantage, avoiding the Bastion sightline. They're working too hard to try to set up for a clean dive onto it, which just lets me and Sombra kind of farm from the outside a lot of the time, with the cover of our Bastion bunker to retreat back under after we're done harassing. Which is why you have to remember, the Bastion is turreted up. He only can stay in one spot. It's really hard for him to move around unless they're doing some top tier East Coast strats with Symmetra bouncing him around. That's a whole nother kettle of fish that we've covered previously. But short of that, you as the attacking team want to get in ground you want to be fighting in outside of the Bastion's control, rather than hanging around in bad spots getting farmed, hoping to set up the perfect clean dive onto it. Instead, look to find open space that you can freely get your value on, no matter what you're fighting, the thing that's contesting the point, other enemies harassing, whatever. Now, the next few clips will be some counter examples or adjustments. This one, you see, same old, same old. We look to dodge the Bastion's presence, and then start pressuring points, because once this rotation comes through, we either can focus the things on point, which we do, or run away from this and reposition to another better spot. That's the value of mobility, right? And the reason why dive beats these static comps. But all of a sudden, this starts to feel a lot worse once the enemy sets up on point B, which isn't even a place you should ever expect a Bastion, where we try to go contest the point here, but the Bastion is in a power position, set up way back in the top high ground, and he's eventually going to end up getting way too much value in this fight. So obviously, we can't pressure point if the Bastion can see it, right? We have to then change our strategy to make sure we fight the Bastion first. Because if you think about it, the way point B on Horizon is shaped, it's just a big open arena, right? But that goes for the attacking side too. In fact, I would say even more so, because they can come out of 3 different entrances, they get easy access to the right side high ground, they have a good crossfire angle from the left side. So instead of going for speed here, I go for the Zen Ana attack, which in most cases in matchmaking is a terrible idea because you're really weak to dive. But because the enemy's playing so passive, I can give out my ranged healing, give my own ranged damage, and sort of similar to the Bastion, I'm creating a very expensive threat in the backline that the enemy should come back and get, but because they're playing Bastion, they can't. So we're able to put our support towards the point, put crossfire damage out, easy as 1, 2, 3. Our mobility characters can dodge the Bastion's value in its effective range, and our Ana Zen support line in the back has free reign to get our damage and value out from long distance. I think we also could get away with just having way more ranged firepower as well, not even necessarily needing the mobility characters. Set up a Hanzo far left, the Zen in the middle. Just put tons of ranged firepower split across the map because the enemy can't really come dive you. That's what you're weak to. Despite Bastion's ranged firepower being better now, it's still not going to beat you just jiggle peeking around corners. It doesn't have the ability to condense its damage into a burst. It requires you to sustain in a fight long enough for it to shred you. Now, our last couple will be examples of my team failing to counter the Bastion and things that you want to look out for to make sure that you adjust. Turn the corner here on Hollywood. We have a Mei, which is actually oddly one of the better picks against Bastion, but it requires quite a bit of teamwork to get it to work. But the main thing that we don't have in this comp is a Diva, which in my opinion is essentially always a must pick against Bastion. It's the only tanking that you'll get that can withstand multiple seconds of his prolonged fire, and without it, we're really going to struggle here. That, and of course, as is often too typical in matchmaking games, the team wasn't on the same page for how we should counter this strategy. Are we able to pressure point? Well, I don't think so, because the Bastion is going to be able to easily peek down and see most of us. This isn't like we're on Horizon or Numbani where we can pressure the point outside of the range of the Bastion, as every time we approach, we're losing our backline. Our Ana's been dead in the first 2 seconds of both these fights, and I gotta remind you guys, remember, think back to the Fusion University example. Squishy players, you have to stay out of the line of sight of the Bastion. Set up wherever you can that's gonna let you survive but operate. Whether that means come with your tanks so that you're next to their shielding for the few seconds that they'll have it, or set up on angles that are just going to avoid its line of sight, even if that means it's harder for you to heal your team, because if they're playing right, similar to how I did on the Numbani example, your tank should be avoiding the line of fire whenever possible. So this round ended up being a complete mess. We only needed a tick to win, and we're not going to end up doing it, spoiler alert, but I try to protect them on point like they ask, but it just gets my shield shredded in 2 seconds. Realistically, you want to get damage onto the Bastion. You don't want to play a composition that just goes and hops on point in its line of fire without an ability to fight it. That's not an option. The most important picks you have to bring is a diva. All the main tanks kind of suck against Bastion. They're only really there to either pressure the point or to be the guy in front to push in on the rest of the enemy. And without a diva, your main tank can't do anything. Then beyond that, have a damage character that's effective at dealing with him. Projectiles are great. Hanzo, Pharah, Junkrat, all of them, if they get an angle, they will destroy the Bastion at range, but also Genji, though will do a bit less damage, poking him down, is way better at cleaning up these bunker comps because the dash resets start to get very painful for a bunker setup, and not to mention static characters in general are really susceptible to getting nanobladed. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed the video and you found it useful. Bastion's a lot better now and is seeing more prevalent use, but if you come equipped with this information, I don't think you'll find it too troubling. Remember, every map is different, so you'll have to adjust case by case depending where it's set up and decide whether it's better to poke, harass, or pressure the objective outside of its line of sight, or if you have no choice, then to just surround it and commit, but most times not. Better to survive and poke it down from a positional advantage, even if that means your tank has to wait around a lot of the time. If you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave it a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. And if you did, why not subscribe so you can see what we upload next? To be sure that you get it though, hit the bell icon next to the subscribe button so you actually get notified when our videos come out. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. That's been it for me. I've been FREEDO for Your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.